Thank you to Babbel for sponsoring a portion of today's video. This video is going to be geared at helping you recognize if you might have low self-esteem. Now, typically there are two routes when a person has low self-esteem. They can either overcompensate for low self-esteem with what appears to be arrogance and grandiosity and ultimately shows up as narcissism, or you have the more classic expression of low self-esteem. And today we're going to be talking about the latter. I just thought I'd mention that though because narcissists do actually have extremely low self-esteem. That's the entire core of the disorder. But the presentation looks very different from what we're going to be discussing today. Actually, at surface level, it looks like the complete opposite from what we're going to be discussing today. So just thought I would make that distinction before we get into it. Let's get started. Number 1, people who have low self-esteem tend to indiscriminately absorb criticism. A healthy person typically has some level of porosity in how they receive criticism. They're able to take feedback non-defensively, but they don't absorb everything, every little nitpick that people send their way. People with poor self-esteem typically struggle with that. They tend to take people at their word when they receive criticism, even when it's not necessarily fair, or they don't have the whole picture, or they don't even know them. For example, let's say that you're a very shy, modest person. Everybody that knows you in your real life says you actually need to work on being more confident and speaking with confidence about the things that you know about. And one day you randomly meet someone about your day who accuses you of being arrogant or pompous. If you are a person with low self-esteem, you will automatically believe them. You will automatically think they must be right. I must be pompous. I must somehow make myself even less confident because clearly what I'm doing is too much. This inability to discriminate what kind of criticism to absorb is also related to the inability to discriminate how much to absorb from projection. So I've made videos on this before on the idea that we do tend to absorb other people's projections when we are highly absorptive people, when we're kind of like sponges and we psychologically take in a lot from other people. Well, a person who has low self-esteem may take in too much psychological stuff that's not even theirs to hold. So for instance, using that example I gave of somebody who barely knows you, who accuses you of being pompous. Why do you think someone who barely knows you would accuse you of being pompous where all evidence points to the exact opposite? Because it's probably a form of projection. You know, we tend to project a lot of things onto people that we don't know very well, sometimes even onto people we do know well. But particularly with strangers, it's easier because they're kind of like a blank slate. So you can project all of your deepest insecurities and desires onto somebody else. So if you have low self-esteem, you can struggle with this. You can struggle with absorbing too much criticism and absorbing too much projection. One really great way to build healthy self-esteem is to learn something new and to constantly be gaining competence at a task, holding yourself accountable privately by taking part in something that nobody else knows about. And in this day and age, one of the easiest ways to practice these skills is by learning a new language, which you can do from the comfort of your own home. This is where I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Babbel. With 662,000 reviews and a 5-star average, I can see why Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. I can tell when I use the app that is very much designed to help you learn language in terms of both speaking it and writing it based on the types of exercises that it offers. It's very clearly geared at teaching you through practice. And like I said, it's super convenient that you can just do it from anywhere. You can do it from home. You can do it on your lunch break, all on your phone. You can learn really practical conversations about topics like travel, work, conversation starters. And it's kind of like having your own personal language coach. One of my favorite things about Babbel is that you can assess your proficiency level in the very beginning so that you can see where would make the most sense for you to start. Because if you've already taken a language a little bit, it doesn't make sense to start from the very beginning. Noi abitiamo a Trieste.
Noi abitiamo a Trieste.
Francia.
La Francia.
La Francia. Il figlio.
Il figlio.
La figlia.
La figlia.
Their lessons are created by over 650 language experts, and if it's not right for you, you can get a 20-day money-back guarantee. Babbel promises to get you started speaking a language in 3 weeks, so it's just enough time to figure out if it's the right fit for you. Get 60% off your subscription using my link below, and let me know what language are you learning and why. Thank you so much to Babbel. Check out the link below. Number 2, people with low self-esteem tend to blame themselves anytime something goes wrong. Now again, a healthy level of taking responsibility is neither extreme. It's not never taking responsibility, and it's not always taking responsibility, because in life, in these complex interactions that we have, there's going to be a mix. And most of the times it's partly your responsibility or partly your fault what happened, but not entirely. So on one extreme, let's say you're having a fight with your brother. He's apologized for his part, but you just cannot admit that you played a part in the conflict as well. That would be the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. A little bit more aligned with like the narcissism of like, I simply cannot take responsibility for anything because I see it as so much of a threat to my self-esteem. On the other extreme, if you're a person with low self-esteem that has kind of the classic presentation, you might take responsibility for everything, even things that are not your responsibility at all. So in this situation, let's say your brother cancels plans last minute for the third time in a row, and your mind immediately goes to, I did something wrong, he must be mad at me. There must be something that I did to cause this. Blaming yourself for everything that goes wrong can show up in a lot of different ways. It can sometimes show up in even feeling like you're being punished when bad things happen to you or when stressful life events crop up. It can lead to you taking responsibility for other people's lives and decisions and actions. It can lead to you feeling really guilty in relationships, even when it's not your fault at all, or maybe just partially your fault. And this goes hand in hand with having low self-esteem. Number 3, people with low self-esteem doubt their right to be in places where they've actually earned to be. Let's say, for instance, you got accepted to a really competitive school or a really well-paying job that you know a lot of people apply to, but somehow you're just convinced that you don't deserve it, you don't deserve to be there, you're going to be outed, everyone there is just so much better at whatever you're doing than you are. I was thinking about this and I thought that, some of the most self-doubting people I know are PhDs, they're researchers, they're people who really go to great lengths to master a field. And this is aligned with what the research says. Like, did you know that imposter syndrome is actually most common among high achievers? People at the highest levels. Why do you think that is? Because high achievers are typically trying to self-improve a lot. They're trying to take responsibility for ways in which they could be doing things better. I'm very much a believer of the Einstein quote that goes something along the lines of, the more I learn, the less I realize I actually know. Some of the most overconfident people I know tend to know the least, versus some of the humblest people I know tend to know the most about things. So if you're often filled with self-doubt, be glad. Be glad that you don't have the confidence level that's so typical of people who know so little. But do aim for a healthy middle ground, because again, neither extreme is very healthy. Be open to being wrong and constantly be trying to self-improve. And also own the fact that you are right where you belong. You are there for a reason, right? Unless you're like some Nepo baby or you got your job because of connections your parents have. Your background brought you to where you are. You somehow stand out compared to other people. So don't doubt that you belong where you are. The fact that you're there is proof that you belong there. Habit number 4 of people with low self-esteem is that they struggle to stand up for themselves. Usually this is because of a fear of being disliked or negatively labeled in some way, like being seen as cold or aggressive or whatever it is. Like, let's say that you have a friend who's always taking jabs at you. You might be scared of saying something about it or calling it out when she does it again because you don't want to be labeled as dramatic or sensitive. And a lot of times when we hold in these resentments, what happens is they start to show up in passive-aggressive ways, like not showing up to things, canceling last minute, us taking jabs at the other person, because it's not healthy to keep it all in and to never stand up for ourselves and to not call out disrespect when it's happening. Again, it requires a healthy middle ground where you can stand up for yourself when necessary, but you're also not so sensitive that people need to kind of walk on eggshells around you and keep things from you because they're afraid of how you're going to react. Habit number 5 of people with low self-esteem is that they tend to speak to themselves very disparagingly, whether it be in negative self-talk, quietly, their inner critic, or out loud. Sometimes they'll say negative things about themselves to other people or to themselves, or they'll write them down. Usually people with low self-esteem tend to have a very verbally abusive inner voice, like, you're so stupid, you can't do anything right, this is all your fault, how could you do this? a way of speaking that if you were to speak that way to anybody else would not be acceptable. But somehow because you're doing it to yourself and you believe that you have low self-worth, oh, then it's okay, right? And number 6, people with low self-esteem tend to assume that others are thinking poorly of them as well. And this is in part a projection, because if you yourself believe terrible things about yourself and you tell yourself terrible things about yourself, of course you're going to assume that other people are thinking that too. We tend to assume for the most part that people are the same way that we are. We tend to project a lot onto others. Or sometimes a lot of people with low self-esteem have had very critical parents growing up. And so part of the assumption there is that all people are like that because our parents are our first really model of how the world works. So if our parents were very critical, we're going to assume that everyone else is also thinking very critical things about us. Now, this is where classic low self-esteem and narcissism really show how they differ. A narcissist is unconsciously projecting that they think they suck. They're projecting that onto other people, but also they're projecting the fact that they're also really critical and negative and judgmental towards other people. Whereas with classic cases of low self-esteem, you don't necessarily think horrible things about other people. You're just projecting the fact that you think that about yourself. Does that make sense? And habit number 7 is that a person with low self-esteem tends to compare themselves to others quite a lot. Because when you have low self-esteem, often a lot of your psychological habits are geared towards improving your self-esteem. But when your focus is on self-esteem, you don't really have the ability to focus on self-compassion. Self-esteem hinges on ranking people in terms of how good they are at certain things versus others. Self-compassion doesn't care who's winning. Self-compassion says that you could be last on a list and still deserve to treat yourself kindly and to be treated kindly. Imagine that you're in a pool and everyone around you is just swimming at their own pace, having a good time, working on their fitness, whatever the reason is that they're swimming. A person with low self-esteem is constantly trying to assess, how do I rank in terms of speed? Am I swimming right? Are other people judging me? Rather than mindfully enjoying the present moment and just doing the best they can and just having a good time, which would be more aligned with self-compassion than with trying to get self-esteem. Now, a narcissist actually does the same thing because they're also extremely preoccupied with self-esteem. But where they differ is that a person with classic low self-esteem consciously and unconsciously thinks, I'm the worst swimmer here. Whereas a narcissist unconsciously thinks, I'm the worst swimmer here, but consciously thinks, I'm the best swimmer here. So in that regard, both of them have in common that they are constantly comparing themselves to other people, and it can become very distressing because they both unconsciously believe that they are the worst in the world. Now, like I said, I'm not going to be providing tips on how to improve self-esteem in this video. That's not the goal here. This is really more just a resource to help you assess where you're at with your self-esteem, but let me know if you would like some videos on improving self-esteem if yours is low. And don't forget to check out Babbel. I will see you soon.